I still remember the first night it happened, not because anything loud or dramatic occurred, but because of how ordinary the day had been. It was the kind of day you never expect to attach to a memory that will haunt you for years. Nothing felt strange. Nothing hinted at what was waiting in my own room. If anything, I was relieved. Exams were over. Everyone else in the house had gone to sleep early, and the evening felt like a chance to finally rest. My room has always been small and cramped, the kind where the bed takes up half the space, and the wardrobe doors bang against the wall if you open them too wide. I kept meaning to clean under the bed, but like most people, I pushed random things under it and forgot. Old notebooks, a water bottle, maybe a hoodie or two. Just clutter. Nothing dangerous ever hides there. At least that's what I used to think. I went to bed around midnight. The ceiling fan made a low hum, the kind that almost feels like company when you live in a quiet house. I remember scrolling on my phone until my eyes started to sting. Everything was normal until I turned off the screen and let the room sink into darkness. The streetlight outside cast a thin line of orange under the bottom of my door. Other than that, the room was pitch black. It started with a feeling, not a sound. An odd sensation, like the air under my bed was colder than the rest of the room. I pulled my blanket up, telling myself I was overthinking. The day had been long, and tired brains imagine things. I forced my breathing to slow, pretending none of it bothered me. For a few minutes, it worked. Then I felt something brush against the underside of my mattress. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even forceful. It felt exactly like someone pressing two fingers upward, just enough for the bed frame to shift a little. My body froze. Every muscle locked. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't even blink. My mind raced for explanations. Rats. A falling notebook. The frame adjusting under my weight. Anything that made sense. But it happened again. A gentle push upward, closer to where my legs were. I stayed completely still. I wanted to jump out of bed, but I was afraid that whatever was under there would react if I moved. The worst part was how quiet everything became. Even the fan sounded muffled, like the whole room was holding its breath. 5 long minutes passed before I convinced myself to reach for my phone. I moved slowly, inch by inch, praying that the mattress wouldn't shift again. When my hand finally grabbed the phone, I didn't turn on the flashlight right away. I waited, listening for any movement underneath. Nothing came, so I angled the light downward, just toward the side of the bed. Dust. My shoes. A corner of a jacket I'd shoved under there. Nothing unusual. I should have checked properly. I know that now. The next morning, everything felt normal again. I almost convinced myself it had been muscle tension in the bed frame. That night, I cleaned the area around my bed, but I didn't bother pulling everything out. I didn't want to. I didn't want to see the dark space fully exposed. I told myself I was being ridiculous. The second night, the tapping started. Not against the mattress this time, but against the floorboards directly under my bed. Soft, slow, rhythmic. Like someone using a fingertip to test the wood. Tap. Pause. Tap. Pause. I lifted my head slightly, trying to see if the sound came from my window or maybe the door. But it was under me. Directly under me. I whispered into the darkness, telling myself I was just imagining noises the way people sometimes hear a phone vibrate and didn't. But the tapping continued, slower now, like whoever or whatever was doing it was enjoying the patience of it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. By the third night, I was exhausted. My eyes burned, and my body felt heavy, but I refused to sleep in the living room. If something really was happening in my room, avoiding it wouldn't make it stop. That's what I told myself anyway. I kept a flashlight in my hand as I lay down. Hours passed without anything happening. I started to relax. Maybe the noises had come from pipes or neighbors or something else that made sense. Maybe I really was overreacting because I was alone. I must have drifted off because the next thing I remember is waking up to the sensation of weight shifting at the foot of my bed. Not on top of the mattress. Under it, a slow upward pressure, like someone was using their back to push gently into the frame. The flashlight was in my hand. I remember gripping it so tightly my fingers started to hurt. I aimed it downward and turned it on. The beam didn't reach far enough to show anything clearly. Just shadows. But in that mess of shadows, something wasn't right. The pile of clothes looked different. Something behind them shifted slightly, as if trying not to move but failing. I slid off the bed as quietly as I could and backed toward the door. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I was too scared to do either. I slipped out of the room and shut the door behind me, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might wake the whole house. For 2 days, I didn't go back except to grab clothes and bed. I convinced myself that whatever I saw was just a trick of shadows, exhaustion, or stress. I hated how easily fear could take one small sound and twist it into something bigger. But part of me knew something was wrong. On the 3rd day, I finally built enough courage to pull everything out from under the bed. Most of it was normal clutter, but behind the old blanket I rarely used, something made my stomach drop. A small, narrow scrape along the wooden floorboard that hadn't been there before. Fresh, clean, as if something had been dragged out or dragged in. I tried to tell myself I made the mark accidentally while cleaning, but deep down I didn't believe that. After that, I slept in the living room for weeks. My room stayed untouched except for quick trips to grab something I needed. My parents said I looked tired, but I told them it was school stress. I didn't want to admit the real reason. Last night, after months of avoiding it, I decided to sleep in my room again. I felt stupid for letting fear control me for so long. I switched on the fan, locked the door, and lay down with a long breath. Everything felt normal again, until a few minutes ago. Something slid quietly across the floor under my bed. Slow, careful, like it remembered I hadn't been here for a while, and wanted to see if I still noticed it. And now, as I lie here holding my breath, I can feel the faintest push upward against the mattress. Not random, not imaginary, almost like someone is trying to remind me they were never gone. I didn't used to be afraid of empty rooms, or dark corners, or that still, heavy silence that settles just after midnight. Those things never bothered me. I grew up in a small, crowded house where privacy was rare, so silence felt like a luxury. My room was the one place I could be alone, stretched across a mattress that squeaked when I turned and facing a ceiling full of tiny tracks I memorized over the years. I trusted that room more than any place in the world. Maybe that's why what happened still clings to me so tightly. It didn't feel like a threat from outside. It felt like something that grew inside the space I thought was safe. It started on a night when sleep refused to come. I had an exam the next morning, and stress was the only thing on my mind. I lay on my bed, eyes half open, watching faint patterns of headlights pass across my walls from cars outside. Everything was normal until I shifted my leg to the side and felt something cold brush against my ankle. My first thought was that my blanket had slipped, but the blanket was tucked beneath me. I froze. Then very slowly, I pulled my leg back. The cold feeling didn't follow, but a sharp awareness settled in my chest, the kind that makes your heartbeat slow and heavy. I told myself it had to be a draft or maybe a cramp. I pushed the feeling aside, but even after I turned on my light and checked the blankets, the memory of that cold touch stayed with me. I didn't check under the bed. I didn't even look at the floor. I didn't want to break the illusion that nothing was wrong, but something was. The next morning, when I stooped to grab my shoes, I noticed something strange. A long, thin scratch ran across the wooden floor beneath the edge of the bed. I didn't remember it being there. It looked fresh, like metal had dragged across the surface. I reached out, touched it, and felt a small, splintered edge. It wasn't the kind of scratch that happens when moving furniture. It looked more like someone had pressed something sharp downward and pulled. I didn't mention it to anyone. I shrugged it off as something I must have overlooked. But that scratch wasn't the last. Every morning that week, a new mark appeared. Something, some curve, some pressed too deeply into the wood to make sense. My parents assumed the bed frame was shifting from age. They told me not to worry, but I could feel something changing in my room. A heaviness, a tension, like the air under the bed had its own temperature. That Friday night, I found the first object. I came home from a late study group and tossed my backpack onto the bed. When it landed, something rolled toward the edge and kind of softly against the wooden floor. The small, rusty bowl. Old, slightly bent, not from my furniture, not from anywhere in my house, as far as I knew. I knelt down slowly and picked it up. It was cold despite the warm room. Too cold. I dropped it into my drawer and tried not to think about it. But the next morning, I found a second object. A thin metal object. Then a tiny screw. Then, a day later, a small piece of wire twisted like someone had bent it with their own hands. All in the same place. All right next to the bottom edge of the bed. I asked my dad about them. He shrugged and said they must have fallen from old furniture, but they didn't match anything in the house. And he didn't look convinced when he said it. That night, I slept uneasily. Every time I turned, I imagined the tiny objects crawling up through the mattress in the dark space beneath me. By 2 in the morning, I was fully awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Then it happened. A soft thump under the bed. Not loud, not heavy, just enough to snap me apart. I didn't move for almost a full minute. Then the sound came again. A shift of weight, a gentle strain. I pictured the floor dust shifting around something that wasn't supposed to be there. My breath quickened. The fear didn't hit all at once. It rose slowly, thickening the air around me, making it hard to swallow. My hands trembled, and all I could do was sit there, staring at the shadowed floor beside my bed. I pulled my feet up without meaning to, curling into myself like a child. It felt childish, but instinct overruled pride. I didn't want my feet anywhere near the floor. The sound didn't repeat. The silence that followed felt intentional. A waiting kind of quiet. I didn't sleep. Not that night. Not the next. On the third day, I convinced myself I was imagining things. That stress was twisting normal sounds into threats. So, I did what I had been avoiding for days. I crouched beside my bed, took a slow breath, and lifted the blanket edge. The darkness under the bed stretched back farther than it should have. Dust clung to the corners like gray fur. At first, nothing looked out of place. Then I saw it. Another object. Not a metal piece this time. A folded scrap of paper. I reached under slowly, my fingers brushing against the cold floor. The paper felt soft, worn from being handled too many times. When I unfolded it, the pencil markings were faint but readable. Stop moving and type. My breath caught in my throat. I dropped the paper like it was burning me and backed up until my spine hit the wall. My mind raced through impossible explanations. Prank, mistake, coincidence, but none of them made sense. No one had been in my room. No one had access. The windows were locked. The door was in my sight every night, but something had put that note there. My parents didn't believe me when I showed them. They said it was old paper. Something left in the room years ago. Maybe I scribbled it when I was younger and forgot. I could hear the uncertainty in their voices, though none of us could fully explain it. I didn't sleep in that room again for a long time. But the story doesn't end there. 2 weeks later, while my room sat untouched, my dad decided to replace the old bed frame, thinking the scratches and noises were from loose parts. When he pulled the bed away from the wall, I expected dust bunnies and old wrappers. Instead, I saw the floor. The scratches were not random. They formed arcs, lines, and marks that traced the shape of fingers. 5 narrow grooves, dragged slowly out, as if someone inside that small dark space had been reaching upward toward the mattress. I didn't say a word. My dad stared at the marks for a long moment and then told me to wait outside. That night, he locked my window with a new bolt. He didn't explain why. I haven't slept with my bed pressed against the wall since then, and I still check the floor every night, even when I stay in hotels or other people's houses. Not for monsters, not for shadows, for proof. Proof that nothing under me is reaching up again.
There are certain moments that stay with you long after they end. Moments that carve themselves into your memory so sharply that even years later, you can still feel the edge. For me, that moment began with something so ordinary I almost ignored it. A missing sock. One of those stupid, everyday annoyances that should be. I remember searching for it with this dull irritation, pulling my blankets back, checking the laundry basket, lifting the corner of the mattress. And When I knelt down and looked beneath the bed, I saw nothing but shadows. Just the usual dark space where dust gathered and forgotten things rolled out. But later that week, a sock reappeared in the middle of my floor. Folded. My room doesn't magically clean itself. No one in my family comes into my room without me. And I definitely don't fold things neatly in the middle of the night. I stood there staring at it, waiting for some logical explanation to quicken the place. But nothing did. The sight of it felt wrong, like finding the phone in the freezer and a toothbrush in the living room. Wrong not because the object itself was strange, but because the location made no sense. I should have told someone, but embarrassment kept me out. How do you explain fear that starts with a sock? You don't. You swallow it and try to forget. Of course, forgetting wasn't an option. A few nights later, I woke up for no clear reason. No nightmare. No noise. Just that prickling sense of being watched. The kind that spreads across your skin before your mind fully catches up. My room was silent. Even the outside street dogs were quiet. I blinked into the dark and rubbed the sleep from my eyes, trying to calm the sudden rush of adrenaline. I shifted my legs under the blanket and felt it. Not a touch, exactly. More like a vibration in the mattress. Faint, rhythmic tapping. Almost like someone lightly knocking on the wooden frame beneath me. Tap. Pause. Tap, tap. I held my breath. The tapping stopped instantly, as if responding to my sudden sneeze. My eyes drifted toward the floor. The shadow stretched from beneath the bed, longer than it should have been, darker than the rest of the room. I tried to tell myself it was just the angle of the streetlight sneaking in through the curtain, but the shadow wasn't shaped like furniture. It was shaped like an arm, not a detailed one, no fingers, no movement, just a long outline of something that shouldn't be there. I stayed frozen for what felt like an hour. When I finally moved, I did it slowly, pulling my legs up from my chest so they wouldn't dangle over the bed. I sat that way until dawn, afraid that lowering my feet would invite something to grab me. By morning, the shadow was gone. Nothing unusual in the bed. No mark. No sign that anything had happened. I told myself it had been a trick of the light mixed with caffeine. That excuse didn't hold up for long. The following evening, I noticed something under my bed that hadn't been there before. A small plastic button. Black. Round. Old. The kind used on coats 10 or 20 years ago. I didn't recognize it. I didn't own any clothes with those kinds of buttons. And yet there it was, sitting near the front edge of the bed like someone had placed it carefully between the floor. When I picked it up, I felt a faint indentation on the back, like it had once been sewn tightly into something. The plastic had been worn smooth by fingers. Someone's fingers. I dropped it immediately. I didn't sleep in my room that night, or the next. My parents brushed it off as stressful school. They didn't understand the feeling of something pressing into your awareness, the sense that an unseen presence had taken an interest in you. It wasn't supernatural. It wasn't paranormal. It was much, much worse. It felt human. The worst night came exactly a week after the tapping incident. I woke around 3 a.m. again. The air was different this time. Heavier. Stale, like the room hadn't been ventilated for days, even though I opened my window early. I could feel my heart pounding before my mind even recognized why I woke up. I lay there, eyes half open, not wanting to fully face whatever had stirred me. Then something moved beneath me. Not a small shake, not a soft tap, a long, deliberate push upward against the mattress. The entire bed lifted a fraction beneath it and settled back. I stopped breathing. My body locked itself in place, refusing to give away even the slightest movement. The air felt thick in my throat, impossible to swallow. Another push, slower this time, like someone testing the weight above me. I wanted to scream, but the sound jammed in my chest. My muscles refused to respond. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I couldn't move. I was pinned not by hands or force, but by pure terror. Eventually, I rolled off the opposite side of the bed and crawled toward the door, pressing myself against the floor to keep as quiet as possible. I didn't dare look under the bed. I didn't want to see anything staring back. I left the house that night and slept at a friend's place. When I returned the next morning to pack a bag, I found something waiting for me. Another object. This time, tucked halfway into the bed, right where my feet would touch the floor if I had climbed out from it. Photograph. Faded. Curling at the edges. Old enough to smell like damp paper. It was a picture of a room. My room. Taken from the angle beneath the bed. The underside of the mattress filled the top half of the frame. My hanging bedsheet brushed the top corner. and in the narrow sliver of visible space, I could make out my own feet standing beside the bed. The picture had been taken while I was in the room. The date was written on the back, 3 days before the first happened. My parents finally believed me when I showed them. They filed a police report, changed the locks, added cameras, and for a while, we all hoped that would be the end of it. Nothing else happened after that. No more objects, no more tapping, no more photographs. But 2 months later, while rearranging my furniture, I noticed something I had missed. On the bottom wooden slat of the bed frame, hidden from the angle I usually check, someone had carved a shallow line across the wood. A single sentence, still here. The police said it could have been there for years. I know better. It hadn't been there the day before. And sometimes late at night, when I lie awake too long, I swear I feel the faintest vibration in my neck. Not a push, not a knock, just breathing. Slow, patient, waiting. The memory still makes my stomach tighten, not because of what I saw, but because of what I didn't see. It began during one of those long stretches of exam season, when days blur together, and sleep becomes something you negotiate rather than avoid. I'd been studying late every night, not because I wanted to, but because every hour felt like it was slipping too fast from my fingers. My room had become a sort of prison cell of open books, half-finished notes, and empty cups I kept promising me to throw away. I guess that's why I didn't notice the early signs. At first, it was the kind of thing you dismiss without thinking. Faint smell, something metallic mixed with dust, hovering close to the floorboard. I assumed it was from the old heater in my room. My parents always said the wiring was from the 50th century. I ignored it, choosing to focus on my notes instead. But the smell lingered, and every time I sat on my bed, I felt it more strongly. The second thing I dismissed was the shift in the temperature of the mattress. Normally, the bed felt warm after I had been sitting on it. But that week, the bottom corner near the wall always felt oddly cold. Not mildly cool. Cold enough that when my hand brushed against the fabric, I would flinch without moving. I flipped the blankets, rearranged the sheets, even checked the underside for any draft coming through the floor, but the cold spot stayed. I kept telling myself that none of it mattered. I didn't have time to deal with small reasons. Then came the sounds. They started faintly like soft taps that could have been anything. Maybe the house settled. Maybe the pipes. I tried not to pay attention, but tapping became scraping. Scraping became dragging. Sometimes the sound was slow and steady. Sometimes it came in short bursts, as if someone below the floor was shifting impatiently. I tried to convince myself it was mice, a rat maybe, but that explanation didn't hold up because there was one consistent pattern. The sounds only happened when I was alone in the room. Never when my parents were nearby. Never when anyone else walked in. One night, after nearly falling asleep on my textbook, I heard something new. Not tapping, not dragging, breathing, slow, moving, too close to be coming through the floor or the wall. The sound vibrated softly through the mattress, the way a phone buzzes from its inside me. I froze instantly. I didn't shift. I didn't blink. The breathing stopped the moment I held my breath. I climbed off the bed as carefully as I could, stepping backwards until my feet touched the cold tile. I didn't dare bend down. I didn't dare look under the bed. I slipped out of the room and slept on the living room sofa, telling myself that exhaustion was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I already knew something was wrong. The next day, things escalated. I came home from school, opened my bedroom door, and immediately noticed the bed. It was slightly shifted to the right, not dramatically, just an inch or two, like someone had crawled from underneath and scraped the frame across the floor by accident. I checked my window, still locked. I checked the door. Almost no one had been home except my grandmother, and she hardly climbed the stairs anyway. My chest tightened. I pushed the bed back to its usual place and stepped away. The idea of checking underneath terrified me more than anything. I didn't want to confirm anything. I didn't want to see an empty space that felt inhabited or worse, shaped or no shape. I avoided my room until nightfall. When I eventually returned, I did what I had promised myself I would do. I knelt down, held my breath, and lifted the hanging sheet. The space under the bed looked normal at first. Dust, a lost pen, an old sock, nothing threatening. But then I saw the wooden slat at the base of the frame. There were faint smudges across it, dark streaks, not dirt, not mold, grease. The kind mechanics have on their hands when they've been working on engines for hours. My heart pounded hard enough to echo in my ears. someone had touched the underside of my bed. I backed away slowly, trying not to make noise, as if the dark space beneath the bed was responding. I slept downstairs again that night, pretending it was because I had fallen asleep while watching TV. The final incident happened 2 nights later. The night I stopped questioning myself. The night the fears stepped out of my imagination and became something I knew not. I had gone to bed early, determined to fix my sleep schedule. My room was cold, but I wrapped myself tightly and forced my eyes shut. I drifted in and out for maybe an hour before a faint vibration spread across the room. My breath caught instantly, then came a pressure against the center of the bed. Slow, deliberate, as if someone beneath was pressing their back upward against the wooden frame, testing its strength. I stayed frozen. My mind raced through every possible explanation, but nothing made sense. Houses do not push back. Furniture does not shift on its own in a perfect order when you breathe. The pressure increased. A low creaking sound rolled on the slab. I felt the mattress rise by a fraction, just barely, but enough to tell me it was real. I slid slowly off the bed, planting my feet on the floor as quietly as possible. My hands shifted controllably. As soon as my weight shifted completely off the mattress, the pressure stopped. Silence. Thick. Intentional. I stood there in the darkness, toes gripping the floor, waiting for a noise that would appear. After 10 agonizing seconds, I bolted out of the room and didn't look back. The next morning, after my parents had left for work, I returned with a flashlight and a metal rod I didn't even remember dropping. I stood at the doorway for a long minute and then stepped closer. I lifted the sheet, and for the first time, there was something undeniably new. A long strip of worn fabric sat near the center of the floor under my bed. Dark gray, frayed at the edges, the kind of material used in old backpacks or duffel bags. Someone had torn it from something. Someone had dragged it there. I picked it up carefully, trying not to shake. The cloth smelled faintly of sweat. Old sweat. The scent of someone who had been hiding somewhere cramped. From the underside of the bed slab came more. Scratches. Not from anyone. Not random. Parallel. Like fingernails dragging from my arm. My legs nearly gave out. I called the police immediately. They searched the house, but whoever had been hiding was laying down. They said it was likely a break-in days ago, and that the intruder returned repeatedly to hide until the opportunity came. They didn't have to say it for me to understand. Someone had been living under my bed, listening to me breathe, watching me sleep, waiting for the right moment. I moved out of that room the same day. I still check under every bed I sleep in, no matter where I am, no matter how safe the place is. What scares me most isn't what happened. It's how long it must have gone on before I noticed anything at all. I still remember the exact day everything shifted, the day my room stopped feeling like mine. It was a Sunday afternoon, one of those lazy hours when the world feels soft and slow. I had been cleaning my room, not because I wanted to, but because the clutter had become impossible to ignore. Books piled on the desk, clothes scattered across the floor, and dust gathering in corners I hadn't touched in weeks. I kept promising myself I would clean, but I always found some reason to delay. That day, I ran out of excuses. As I pulled my bed away from the wall to vacuum behind it, I noticed something strange. A dent in the carpet near the bottom edge of the bed. Around, something impression, like something heavy had been pressing on it for a long time. I touched it and felt the fibers crushed almost flat. The indentation didn't match anything. It didn't match the bed frame. It didn't match anything underneath. I brushed it off, telling myself it must have been there for years, and I had simply never noticed. But something about the way the shape curved made my stomach twist. It looked almost like the outline of a knee, an elbow pressing down. I shook off the thought and kept cleaning. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet, I lay in bed scrolling through my phone. My room was dim except for the faint glow of the screen. The air felt still, heavy, as if the day had soaked all movement out of the world. I shifted my position and felt the mattress grip strangely beneath me. Not the usual dip from my own weight, but something uneven underneath, like the wooden slat that suddenly flipped. The sensation lasted only a second, but it was long enough to make me freeze. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the frame was old. Maybe I had shifted too fast. I placed my hand flat on the mattress, waiting for the weight to settle. Nothing happened. I went to sleep pretending it didn't bother me. But it did. Over the next few days, I felt the same way. Some nights it was faint. Other nights, strong enough to make my breath catch. It happened only when I was lying still, Never during the day. Never when anyone else was in the room. Then small things began to move. Items I kept on the floor in a new time, my backpack, shifted in my hand. Not dramatically, just a few inches out of place. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I kicked them without noticing. Maybe I was sleepwalking. But sleepwalking didn't explain the backpack that had been unzipped from my hand. It didn't explain the small spiral notebook that had been moved from the side of the bed to the center of the floor. I started feeling tense whenever I entered my room. Like the air was too thick. Like I had to step carefully, as if disturbing something would make it reveal itself. The night things truly changed was Wednesday. I had gone to bed early, exhausted from school. I turned off the lights, pulled the blanket up, and closed my eyes. I wasn't asleep long before something pulled me awake. Not a sound, but a feeling. The pressure against my back, subtle but unmistakable, as if someone was pushing lightly up from beneath the mattress. My eyes snapped open even though the room was pitch dark. For several minutes, I couldn't move. I lay there, muscles stiff, breathing shallow, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. But then the pressure shifted, slowly, intentionally. It traveled from the center of the mattress toward the edge closest to me. The wood under me gave a tiny creak. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the sound filled the room. Instinctively, I slid off the bed, pulling myself toward the edge without letting my feet touch the floor. When I finally dropped onto the carpet, I stayed there, trembling, too afraid to look into the bed. I left the room and slept on the couch, pretending to myself that I had simply overheated in my room or had a vivid dream. The next morning, I returned to pack clothes for school. The moment I pushed the door open, I saw it. A sheet of paper lying halfway beneath the bed. Not a notebook page. Not something I recognized. A torn scrap with jagged edges. I picked it up, hesitant, and turned it over. One word was written in thin, shaky pen strokes. Stay. My breath hitched. The writing didn't look like mine. The ink was smudged, like the hand that wrote it had been unsteady or the environment cramped. The letters leaned downward, slanting as if written horizontally on a surface that wasn't flat. I felt sick. I showed my parents. They insisted it was a prank. Maybe an old note I forgot. Maybe something I wrote years ago. But none of that explained why it was under my bed. None of it explained how I had never seen it before. None of it explained the shifting objects, the pressure on the mattress, or the dip that appeared right beneath where I slept. Still, I tried to believe them. Then came the final incident. It happened 3 days after the note. A cold night. I had been sleeping on the sofa since then, refusing to step inside my room except when absolutely necessary. But that night, my mother insisted I return to my room for at least a few hours, claiming I needed proper rest. I didn't argue. I didn't want her to think I was losing my mind. I entered the room slowly, scanning every corner before turning off the light. I climbed onto the bed carefully, keeping my feet far from the edges. My body tensed immediately, anticipating the pressure beneath me. Nothing happened for an hour. Then, just as I started drifting off, I heard something. A breath. Not mine. Not from the hallway. A breath directly beneath me, muffled by the mattress. I shot upright, every muscle screaming to run, but before I could move, the wooden slats under the bed groaned. A slow bending sound, like someone shifting their weight in a cramped position. I bolted. When my parents rushed in, they found me crying, shaking, completely unable to explain the sound in words. My father grabbed a flashlight and crouched down to check beneath the bed. He froze. I saw the expression on his face change, from irritation to confusion to something colder. He reached under slowly and pulled out an object. A small, dirty blanket, rolled tightly, thin, worn. It smelled of sweat and dust. The kind of blanket someone would use if they were hiding somewhere, sleeping somewhere no one should ever sleep. He didn't speak. He went rigid. Then he told us all to leave the room immediately. He called the police before he even stood back up. They searched the room, the attic, the entire house. They found nothing else and no one. But one piece of information stuck with me, and still chills me every time I think about it. According to the officers, the blanket was warm. Someone had been lying on it not long before we discovered it. Someone had been hiding under my bed. Someone had been listening. And whoever they were, they left without being seen, without being heard, leaving only the faint sound of breathing burned into my memory. Even now, years later, I still can't sleep unless the underside of my bed is visible. I still check every corner, every shadow, every gap beneath furniture. Because the worst part isn't what happened. The worst part is realizing how long it must have been going on without me noticing at all. I still remember the weight of that night, the way the room felt too small, too quiet, like something was holding its breath in the dark with me. It began on a Tuesday, the kind of uneventful day that disappears from memory, unless something awful stains it forever. I had come home late from work, exhausted, barely aware of anything except the desire to collapse on my bed. Nothing strange, nothing out of place. Or at least that's what I thought then. Now I know the small details matter. The misplaced sock, the shifted corner of the bedsheet, the faint scrape on the floor that I convinced myself was the house settling. These were warnings, but I was too tired to notice. The room felt colder than usual that night. Not freezing, just wrong. The kind of wrong that tightens the skin on your arms, even when there's no breeze. I tried to ignore it. I tried to tell myself it was because the day had been long, draining, and my mind was too foggy to trust. I crawled into bed, pulling the blanket over myself, convincing myself that sleep would knock me out before my thoughts drifted into places they didn't belong. But the moment I lay down, I felt it again. A strange pressure beneath the mattress, like something settled its weight against the wooden slats. I tried shifting positions, but the pressure moved too. Not enough to be noticeable to anyone else, maybe, but I felt it. A faint change, like the bed breathed. I told myself it was in my head. I turned to face the wall, but the silence behind me became something solid, something I could almost touch. Every little sound felt magnified. The ticking of the clock, the hum of the street outside, and under it all, something else. A faint rhythm that didn't belong to anything I recognized. Soft, slow, almost like someone dragging their fingertips along the underside of the mattress. The first wave of fear was small, manageable. I told myself the fabric was shifting because of my movements. But then the pressure returned, a slow push upward, like something adjusting its position beneath me. I lay there frozen, trying to decide if I should move or stay perfectly still. My breathing grew shallow, and I kept imagining something down there holding perfectly still too, listening to me. Minutes stretched, maybe hours. It felt endless. When I finally forced myself to glance over the side of the bed, even just a little, the darkness beneath it seemed too deep. Deeper than it should have been. My eyes couldn't catch any shape, any color, just a void that felt like it was waiting for something. I pulled back onto the mattress, telling myself I was overreacting. That exhaustion was distorting everything. I pressed my back against the wall and tried to calm the shaking in my arms. Eventually, the tension dulled into something numb, and I drifted in and out of a thin, restless near sleep. It must have been around 3 in the morning when I felt the mattress move again. Not a shift, not a creak, a deliberate push upward, right beneath my lower back. The kind of pressure that only makes sense if someone puts their hand there. I jerked awake. The room was still pitch black, but this time the cold felt sharp enough to sting. The rhythm came back too. That slow drag, fingertips brushing wood. I slid off the bed as quietly as I could, half expecting something to reach out and stop me. My legs were trembling, and for a moment I couldn't breathe at all. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the bed, but the darkness beneath it didn't move, didn't shift, didn't react. I thought about running outside, but some part of me needed to know what was under there. Needed to prove it was nothing, because the alternative was too much. I grabbed my phone and turned the flashlight on, the white beam cutting across the room like a blade. For a moment, I hesitated, holding the light toward the floor but not yet angling it under the bed. I kept telling myself there was no reason for fear. No reason for my throat to feel tight. No reason for my hands to shake so badly. Then I lowered the phone. The light slid beneath the bed, illuminating the wooden floor, the storage boxes pushed to the back, the dust beside them. Everything looked normal. Completely normal. Too normal. I stared, waiting for something to move, for the shadow to shift, for the pressure I had felt to make sense. But nothing happened. I stayed awake until sunrise, sitting against the far wall of my room, the light pointed at the bed the entire time. Nothing emerged. Nothing moved. Eventually, exhaustion hit me hard enough that I drifted off in the corner, the phone slipping from my hand. The next morning, I convinced myself it had been stress. Hallucinations from lack of sleep. The mind playing tricks the way it does when the body is too tired to resist. I stripped the sheets, lifted the bed, checked everything. Nothing. Just wood and dust and the storage containers I'd forgotten about. For a few days, everything was normal again. No pressure. No sounds. No strange coldness. The room felt like a room again, not a trap waiting for me to lie down. But 3 nights ago it happened again. This time there was no slow build-up. No soft pressure. No quiet warning. I had been trying to fall asleep when the entire mattress jolted upward. Not lifted, not pushed. Jolted, like someone had slammed both hands into the underside with enough force to make the frame shudder. The blanket slid partially off me, and I scrambled backwards so fast I hit the headboard. I pointed my phone flashlight under the bed again, expecting to see nothing. Hoping to see nothing. But the light didn't reach as far as it should have. The darkness under the bed wasn't shadow anymore. It was thicker, like something was blocking the beam, absorbing it. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. Last night was the worst, though. I didn't lie down at all. I stayed awake, sitting in the chair across the room, staring at the bed. At 2:17 a.m., the mattress pressed upward, slow and steady, as if someone underneath was pushing one hand, then the other, testing the weight of the empty bed. The wooden slats groaned, bending slightly under the pressure. I could see the entire frame rise by almost an inch. I didn't turn on the light. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe loudly. I just sat there, barely blinking, the terror settling into something steady and cold inside me. It stopped after a minute. The room fell still again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was under there wasn't trying to scare me. It was checking if I was still in the bed. Tonight, I'm planning to leave the house. Maybe stay with a friend. Maybe not come back at all. But something keeps bothering me, something I can't ignore no matter how hard I try. When I came home from work earlier, the bed looked different. The mattress wasn't flush against the wall anymore. It had been pulled 2 inches away from it. Something under there isn't waiting for me to sleep anymore. It's getting ready to come out. I never used to think about the space under my bed. It was just a dark rectangle where dust gathered, and where I shoved boxes I didn't want to look at. But now, when I picture that space, my stomach twists the way it does before a steep drop. Because I know what was hiding there. Or rather, who. It started on a night that was already unsettling. A power outage had taken down every light in the house, leaving the rooms washed in a dim, moonlit glow that made everything look slightly distorted. I had been lying in bed for maybe an hour, unable to sleep, listening to the occasional pop of the cooling pipes. My mind drifted in and out, restless but too tired to stay fully awake. I remember flipping onto my side, pulling the blanket up, and staring at the faint outline of my dresser. Nothing unusual, nothing strange, until something tapped the underside of my mattress. It was so gentle I thought I imagined it. A light thud right beneath my hip, almost like a knuckle brushing wood. I froze, waiting for it to happen again. The room felt heavier suddenly, like the air thickened with pressure. But after a minute of silence, I let my muscles unclench. I told myself it was the old frame settling, or maybe the bed springs shifting. But then it happened again. 2 taps. Light. Precise. Definitely not the house settling. My chest tightened. Every instinct in me said not to move, but curiosity pushed harder. I leaned over the edge of the bed, slowly lowering my head, letting my eyes adjust to the dark void beneath. The moonlight didn't reach far under there, and all I could see was blackness. For a moment I thought I made out a shape, a curve, maybe a ridge, but it might have been the boxes. I couldn't be sure. I pulled myself back up and forced my breathing to slow. Eventually, maybe from exhaustion, I fell asleep. The next morning, I looked under the bed properly. Nothing. Just storage containers, an old blanket I thought I lost, and a scattering of dust that made my throat itch. Everything seemed normal, almost laughably so. I even knocked on the wooden slats myself, trying to recreate the sound from the night before. It didn't match. My taps were louder, sharper. What I heard last night had been softer. Controlled. That detail lodged itself in my mind for the rest of the day, turning over and over like a stone in a river. Controlled. Like someone was testing the sound. Testing if I noticed. Days passed without anything strange happening. I almost forgot about it, telling myself it was probably just the frame reacting to temperature changes. But 4 nights later, it happened again. Only this time, it didn't stop at tapping. I had just turned off my phone, letting my eyes drift shut, when I felt a push. Not strong, but unmistakable. Something pressed upward from beneath the bed, right into the center of the mattress, lifting it by maybe a few millimeters. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I lay still, feeling the pressure shift, first under my lower back, then near my shoulder blades, then near my calves. Slow. Searching. It felt like someone sliding their hands along the underside of the mattress, feeling for where my body was. I slid out of bed so fast I tangled in the blanket and fell to the floor, my elbow slamming into the wood. The pain barely registered. My only thought was getting away from the bed. I crawled backward until I hit the dresser. The room was silent again. Too silent. I grabbed my phone and shined the flashlight beneath the bed, expecting, hoping, to see nothing but boxes and dust. But the storage containers weren't where I had left them. They had been pulled toward the center, creating a dark hollow right beneath where my body had been. I didn't sleep that night. For the next week, I avoided the bed entirely. I slept on the couch, leaving the bedroom door shut. I told myself I was overreacting. Maybe the boxes shifted because of vibrations. Maybe the pressure I felt was my imagination. But I never believed the explanations, not really. Something was wrong in that room. Something was using the space I never thought about, the space I never checked. Then yesterday, everything escalated. I came home earlier than usual. The sun was still bright outside, flooding through the windows. I went to my room, planning to grab a jacket before heading out again. When I opened the door, I froze. The bed was shifted. Not a little. A lot. It had been dragged nearly a foot from its original place, angled slightly toward the door. The floor beneath it showed clear scrape marks, long, uneven grooves cutting into the wood. My throat tightened as I stepped closer. The space under the bed was visible from where I stood, and the darkness beneath seemed deeper than it should have been with the sunlight pouring in. Something about the angle made me feel like the bed hadn't just been moved. It had been pulled. I backed out of the room and closed the door, my hand trembling on the knob. I left the house without grabbing anything, without looking back. I wandered around town for hours, trying to convince myself that maybe I had bumped the bed earlier and forgotten. But the scrape marks were too deep, too fresh. Something had moved it. Something strong enough to drag furniture, but quiet enough that no neighbors heard a thing. I returned home just before dusk. The house felt colder, the way it does when you know someone else has been there even if everything looks the same. I stood outside my bedroom door for a long time, listening. Nothing. Eventually I opened it. The bed was back in place. Perfectly aligned. Almost too aligned. The scrape marks were still there, undeniable. But the bed had been pushed back, maybe even more precisely than before. I stared at it, my pulse hammering, my mouth dry. Something wanted it to look untouched. Something wanted me to think everything was normal. But I couldn't ignore the final detail. The blanket had been pulled down on one side, hanging toward the floor. Not messily, not randomly. It hung in a way that reminded me of a hand reaching up during the night. A hand that stopped when I woke last time. I haven't slept at all. I'm writing this from the living room, the lights all on, every window locked. I keep glancing down the hallway, half expecting the bedroom door to shift or the floorboards to creak. But what scares me most is the thought that the person hiding under my bed, because I'm sure it's a person, not something supernatural, not a dream, isn't just passing through. They've been there long enough to know my habits, my schedule, the way I sleep, where I lie on the mattress, how long it takes for me to drift off. And the silence tonight feels different. Not empty. Expectant. I think whoever has been hiding under my bed is waiting for me to come back into the room. And I don't know how much longer they're willing to wait.